Let's bring in Margaret if you'd like to join in. I see you left, so that's an entree.
Yes, hi, how are you? It's good to be
Fine,
back.
Margaret, good to see you.
Under sad circumstances. I think it's interesting that the events of the last few weeks, which you've mentioned, this smear in the Guardian, which they had to know was not true. So let's just remember, the Guardian published the visitor logs from the Ecuadorian embassy, and Manafort's name wasn't on them. The building is under constant surveillance. If he'd ever been in the building, there'd be pictures of him. So it's a very obvious lie. I think it's interesting that the propaganda has been so all-encompassing, so constant, that an obvious lie like that can be told, and it isn't questioned by the rest of the media. Did the rest of the corporate media point out any of the things I just said?
Nope.
Excuse me, that there was no proof, actually proof that he was not there, that Manafort was not there. And I think is it coincidence that this story appears at the same time that Julian is indicted, or that there's news of this indictment? I don't think so. I think all of these things are tied together. The corporate media working with the surveillance state in the US working with the surveillance state in the UK, is very chilling to me. And of course, what they've done to Julian, they've made it difficult for people to defend him, because he is the man to blame for Trump being president. That's what people have been told over and over again for months, for 2 years now. Trump is president. Trump's victory was illegitimate. He won because WikiLeaks, or did the Russians steal and give to WikiLeaks, or WikiLeaks steal and give to the Russians? I don't even know anymore. But he is blamed for this. And so there are people who would have, a few years ago, would have defended him, who would be hard pressed to do so now. So that makes all of this very difficult. But we did talk about taking action. I know he has good attorneys. I'm hoping, is there a possibility, has it been discussed for him to ask the UK for asylum in case he's dragged out of the embassy? Now, I know they wouldn't want to give it to him, but it could at least embarrass them, perhaps. I don't know. I was just wondering if that topic has ever come up. But I think we have to keep doing what we're doing, and I hope people in the UK who are on the ground there, who could demonstrate, who could protest, who could just show up in mass. I mean, let's look at what's happening now in Paris. We forget what happens when there's mass action. People there have forced Macron to backpedal. And I think if there were something huge to happen in London, it could undo some of the propaganda. It could force people who have just conformed and just gone along with these lies to begin to question them. So those are just my observations now. But I think this is a time to be bold and to think outside the box to try to save this man, because if you look at his enemies, and if you look at who wants to lock him up and lock him away forever, it's clear why he's important, and it's clear why we have to defend him.
Well, they want to lock him up because he's directly threatening their interests. I'm talking about individuals inside the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Department, the Foreign Office, GCHQ, MI5 and MI6, people, business, big, powerful business interests. He's a public enemy number one. Well, he's their enemy. He's not public enemy number one. He's on the side of the public. If you oppose Julian Assange, you're on the side of the state against the people. It's a very simple way to put it. Now, it's really interesting you brought up Paris, because that is exactly right. That shows time and time again, history is full of examples when the people really do get angry and organized. They are terrified, and they will drop a new petrol tax. They will backpedal, as you say. And this is what we need to see for Assange. Now, you also mentioned, interesting, that there were people who once supported Julian and now don't. Today at the National Press Club here in Washington, I went to an event where Alan Rusbridger, who was the editor of The Guardian during the whole period of the WikiLeaks, working with The Guardian, and then Snowden, was there being interviewed by Marty Baron, the executive editor of the Washington Post. And Rusberger said he would go to court if Assange has a trial. He would defend, he would be a witness in his defense only during the period in which they worked together on the WikiLeaks. But since the Russians gave him these stolen documents, these emails, he wouldn't be able to do it anymore. So that's a very good example right there of a guy who used to be very powerful as the editor of The Guardian. He's left 3 years ago. He was 20 years the editor, saying that the Russians changed everything. And in that conversation, I was telling Ray before we went on the air here that both Barron and Rusbridger alternated between saying the Russians did it, and then they would say, well, if the Russians gave it to Assange, then which one is it? So Ray puts forward the idea that they're just covering themselves in either eventuality. People can quote them, whatever side they're on that issue. So Paris is a key moment, and somehow the public has to know that Assange is on their side against these people who are screwing them, and they got to go out and force against him, and that's what we're trying to drum up here, basically. Speaking of drums and banging pots and things like that.
Completely agree. Completely agree. We need to have a mass mobilization. It's going to have to happen in London, and people are going to have to show that they do have the power when they come together, precisely as we've been seeing in France and now in multiple other European countries.